Thanks for checking out this retro review of Zen Intergalactic Ninja. Zen Intergalactic Ninja, released by Konami in 1993, is a platformer based on the comic book with the same name. The game is full of classic 90s style storytelling and over-the-top themed characters. It makes it fun to play, and although I didn't have this game growing up, it still felt nostalgic to play through. Zen is an alien trained in all forms of martial arts with a focus on saving the Earth from the evil Lord Contaminus and his minions. The comic has a strong eco-friendly theme that carries over into the game. I picked up the first issue of the comic book and actually found that it was a pretty good kids comic. I enjoyed the backstory and understanding a little bit more about the game, although it's definitely not necessary to have that information in order to enjoy the game. But it's not an expensive comic, and so if you're into comics, it's one that I would recommend picking up just for fun. The game has great artwork, and it's actually one of the things that initially drew me to the game, and I wasn't disappointed. The gameplay reminded me of a cross between Mega Man and Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles arcade. The controls were pretty simple with only a few moves to remember, and the layouts were straightforward but with some challenging obstacles. I had a blast playing the game. It wasn't too easy, but it didn't have a steep learning curve or required the total memorization of each level. One of the greatest strengths of the game was that it offered a lot of variety. Each level was different and offered a welcome change of pace. I never found myself bored playing through the game or frustrated to the point where I wanted to quit. Similar to Mega Man, players can choose the order of the levels they play through, and each level has a themed boss based around some eco-friendly concept. The ability to choose between different levels was actually very refreshing because when I did get stuck in one level, I could switch and try out another level for a while and then come back to the parts that I got stuck on. The first level was based on a mining theme where you actually ride on rail cars and fight against enemies, and then eventually against a boss based on the evils of non-environmental friendly mining. This level was unique and challenging because it switched between an isometric view and a side view that could get a little bit confusing to go back and forth, but overall it was a very fun level. The next level was based on fighting acid rain. It was a vertical level that required players to navigate a vertical level and activate the plants that were being damaged by the acid rain. When these plants were up, it weakened the boss that you could fight, and this was essentially just a big boss fight because you could jump straight to the boss as soon as you enter the level. However, it was helpful to weaken her through the use of the plants that had to be activated. This was probably my favorite of the initial levels because it was so unique and different from most of the other platformers I had played. A cool feature in this game was the ability to go back to previous parts within each level and sometimes have to activate or use different features throughout the level. Most of the levels were not very long in themselves, but because you had to activate different tools within them, they took a little bit of time to get through. Once you figured out the right moves, most of the bosses were pretty easy to beat, but it did take some time to figure out what that key was because it wasn't always obvious the exact way to beat the boss. The theme of the next level is that Zen is trying to blow up a chemical factory. I'm not sure how eco-terrorism would fly in a kid's game these days, but it was a fun level. An isometric sort of slasher. This is the one that kind of reminded me a lot of the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles arcade. It was a little bit challenging at first when you figured out how to time the jumps and use some of the different attacks, but it was a fun level once you get the hang of it. Animation within the game was great as well, as there are multiple images for Zen running and a lot of the other bad guys that you will fight against. So it was a great game altogether and a visually pleasing game. The final of the original levels before getting to the boss fights was the one that took me the longest, and this one was based on firefighting and sort of had a puzzle element that took a while to get the hang of. Once you figure out what you're supposed to do in the level, it gets a little bit easier, but it did have some puzzle elements as that you have to put out the fires in a certain order in order to free all of the firefighters who've been trapped in this building before you can go and take on the boss. This one was challenging because you could get stuck to where if you accidentally used your fire extinguisher on one of the enemies instead of on the burning door, you could actually end up trapped. Getting stuck a few times, I actually realized that some of the enemies would randomly drop the fire extinguishers when you defeated them, and so you could actually get around this that way, but it was a challenging puzzle aspect. The variety between the levels was awesome. Every time I tried a new level, I ended up loving it and having to learn a totally new mechanic, but that it kept the game fresh the entire time. The music in the game was awesome as well. It was an NES game that even after playing it for a while, I never felt like I wanted to play my own music over top of it to drown it out. It was a very well done soundtrack, especially for an NES game. Overall, I was very pleased with this game. The game had some minor frustrating points until you figured out the mechanics, such as timing jumps and how to use the fire extinguishers in the fire level. However, with some practice, I was able to navigate the levels effectively without the desire to rage quit. The only other downside to the game is the price tag. It's becoming a hard to find game and can set gamers back $75 to $100 at this time for an authentic copy. However, if I'm going to pay a lot of money for a retro game in my collection, I would much rather buy a game that's expensive because it's a good game than to buy a game that's expensive just because it was a limited edition or a different variation of a common game. While I don't often pay full retail prices for games, this is one that I would definitely recommend picking up if you have the chance. It's expensive because it's a good game. And the ultimate test is whether or not you have fun playing a game, and this is one that definitely passes the test. It's well made, not too hard, not too easy, has an interesting story, great art, and the music is good. So I would highly recommend picking up Zen Intergalactic Ninja if you ever get the chance. Thanks for checking out this retro review by Retro Teachers, and let me know what you think.